Hello and welcome to a quick and dirty guide to Siege of Boralus, a Battle for Azeroth dungeon returning for Season 1 Mythic Plus in the War Within. The goal of this guide is to go over the important mechanics and strategies for the trash and bosses in this dungeon so that you can succeed from day one. So let's get into it. The trash at the start of the dungeon is some of the hardest trash in the run, so I expect some routes to include invis skips or shrouds early on. In these first packs you'll find Black Tar Bombers, who will cast Firebomb, dealing heavy single target damage to random targets, while the Scrimshaw Enforcer has a frontal, Slobber Knocker, so be careful if you're melee and near the tank. The bombers will also occasionally cast Burning Tar, placing a swirl under one player's feet which can be dodged, and leaving a large fire zone which ticks for heavy damage. The Wave Shaper casts Brackish Bolt, dealing moderate damage and should be kicked when you can. The last mob is the Scrimshaw Gutter, which has moderate tank damage with Toothbreaker, but it does reduce the tank's haste, which can lead to them being in more danger while the debuff is on them. The Iron-Tide Raider is a particularly annoying mob who will cast Iron Hook, pulling all party members into melee and dealing damage. They'll follow this up with Savage Tempest, doing heavy damage to anyone who stays in melee, so move out quickly after you get pulled in. The Riptide Shredders will occasionally teleport behind a party member with Iron Ambush, dealing moderate damage, and will cast Singing Steel on your tank, dealing moderate damage with some damage over time as well. You'll also want to watch out for the Watertight Shell, an important kick from the Wave Shapers. If it goes off, the mob will take heavily reduced damage, and when the buff expires, they'll burst for large AoE damage and stun all players. While the damage is livable until very high keys, the stun can quickly lead to player deaths. You'll find two more packs with the same mobs standing in front of the first boss, so handle them the same way. But be careful as it's very easy to accidentally pull the first boss, which can be dangerous if not intentional. If you have a class that can reset the boss, doing that and then pulling these packs together or just off to the side can make things easier. Once you've cleared the area, you can pull the first boss, Chopper Redhook. This is an interesting boss as you'll spend most of this fight kiting the main boss, and most damage will come from the adds. The boss will fixate on one player and chase them down, dealing decent damage if he reaches them and knocking them around. Thankfully, he starts his fixate moving very slow, but ramps up his speed as he chases, so try to save movement buttons for later if possible. While you're kiting the boss, there will be adds doing other mechanics. The Iron-Tide Powder Shot mainly just does random damage with Molten Slug, while the Iron-Tide Cleaver has a large frontal to dodge with Heavy Slash. Shortly after the boss fixates, several large circles will appear across the arena. These will deal heavy damage to anyone in them, and leave 3 mines around the arena. If you don't get the boss into one of these mines before his fixate finishes, he'll do a similar hook into melee, followed by smash combo like the Iron-Tide Raiders. Then he'll refixate another player. The goal is to run the boss over the mines, which deals damage, stuns him, and makes him take increased damage for a short duration, which is a good time to use DPS cooldowns. He'll then refixate, and you'll kite him towards another mine. Try to be quick with this movement as the mines are on a timer and will detonate for heavy party damage when they time out. If you won't get the boss over a mine in time, a party member with a heavy defensive or the tank can run over the mine directly to prevent the party damage, but will take moderate damage doing so. As you kite and kill the boss, more adds will spawn, so the tank will want to pick them up and try to keep them near the boss so you can cleave both. Rinse and repeat until the boss is dead. In the next area, you'll find more Wave Shapers and Powder Shots, while also running into Iron-Tide Curse Blades. These apply a curse to the tank, increasing their damage taken, so a curse cleanse is helpful. Or, the tank can CC and kite when the stacks get high. Most groups skirt to the side here, as there is an Iron-Tide Raider on the main path, which can be annoying and there is easier count to get elsewhere. The commander does pat to the edges of this area, so you'll likely have to fight them unless you place yourselves or time your movement very carefully. Before moving on, stop. Moving forward here will trigger a short RP where several mobs will fire down the bridge, dealing massive damage very quickly. You can hide behind this pile of boxes to avoid the damage until the mobs RP and start to reload. Once the mobs are engaged, they won't fire down the bridge anymore. So in this run, our tank rushed forward and engaged the mobs while the rest of the party finished off the affix so we could move forward safely. There will be a new mob here, the Ashvane Spotter. This mob will cast Sighted Artillery, marking one player who will be bombarded by cannon fire on a short delay. Keep moving so you don't get hit by the circles, but try to stick to an edge so you don't drop the circles on your party. This mob will also leap away from the tank if not slowed, so if you have one you can use it, but it's mainly an annoyance. You can cross the wreckage ahead, but staying in the water in this dungeon for too long will instantly kill you as sharks come, so most groups go up and over the ship here. This is where you'll encounter your first Ashvane commander if you skipped the one from earlier. This mob will cast Azurite Charge, dealing a large burst of damage to the target and applying a massive dot to anyone in the circle. So if you're targeted, try to move out of the party, but don't run around wildly as you don't want to accidentally cleave anyone. This mob will also cast Bolstering Shout, applying a damage reduction to nearby mobs, so make sure you kick it, though it won't cast it if there are no mobs nearby. The final pack before the second boss has another 2 new mobs. The deckhands will hit your tank with Crimson Swipe, also increasing damage taken, while the Ashvane Cannoneer will cast Broadside, a massive frontal aimed at a random player which deals heavy damage, so be ready to dodge. Dread Captain Lockwood will shoot the tank and occasionally cast Clear the Deck, a frontal with almost no indicator beyond the cast, so be careful in melee. She'll also cast Fiery Ricochet, dealing damage and applying a decent dot to all players except for one. This is the majority of the damage in the encounter, so be ready to heal each cast and use defensives. The boss has the same evasive buff as the spotters, and will cast the incredibly painful Gut Shot at random targets if the tank isn't in melee, so this is a fight you'll want to make sure the boss is always slowed by some effect. Frost Mages, Frost Death Knights, Warriors, or Monks are great as they can constantly apply a slow, while other comps might have to figure out what they'll do to keep the boss CC'd. Occasionally, the boss will mark everyone in the party with Mass Bombardment, replicating the effect from the spotter. A tip to preserve space is that you can bait 2 circles in the same spot before having to move, but if you're unfamiliar with the timing, just keep moving so you don't get hit. When the boss reaches 66%, she'll jump to the boat and spawn 2 deckhands and a cannoneer. You'll want to focus down the cannoneer as he drops an interactable cannon when he dies that you can fire at the boss to bring her back. Throughout the intermission, swirls will spawn around the area, so pay attention as they can make dodging the cannoneer's broadside difficult. Be careful to apply a slow on her when she returns so she doesn't accidentally leap away. Rinse and repeat until the boss reaches 33% for another intermission, and then the boss will die. After this boss, there will be another firing squad RP, so use the wagon to avoid damage until they reload, or send your tank ahead to tag the mobs so they run away. The trash next is some of the more annoying and will test your patience. The Bilge Rat Buccaneer will cast Banana Rampage, dealing damage to anyone in melee and spawning several bananas on the ground nearby. These will stun anyone who runs over them, which makes navigating the mechanics of the trash a hassle. The Bilge Rat Demolisher will cast Crushing Slam, dealing heavy party damage, while the Bilge Rat Pillager will try to cast Stinky Vomit. This deals damage and leaves a disease dot behind, so make sure you kick these, especially if you don't have a disease to spell. The Demolisher will also alternate his slam with Terrifying Roar, fearing all players in melee. The last mob, the Bilgerat Tempest, has a high priority kick with Choking Waters, which is a heavy dot that silences the target as well. While this can be dispelled, if it targets the healer, there's nothing they can do and they'll probably die. Otherwise, this mob just spam casts Water Spray, so kick when you can. You'll encounter more of these mobs as you make your way around the streets, and eventually you'll find another spotter, now flanked with Ashvane snipers. These mobs do a ton of damage with Ricochet, but will only shoot targets in a 180-degree field in front of them, so have your tank face them away and stand behind the mobs, and the damage goes down immensely. Making our way into the third boss room, you'll find two more mobs, which are the last unique ones of the dungeon. The Ashvane Invader will cast Stinging Venom, applying a poison on the tank, which stacks if there are more invaders, and hurts at high stacks, so dispel this if you can to help out. The Ashvane Destroyer will just enrage itself with Ferocity, which can also be soothed to help keep tank damage down. You don't have to clear all the trash in this room, but I'd recommend it as it lets you use space more freely for the boss mechanics. The third boss, Hadal Darkfathom, only has a few mechanics, but can be very dangerous if you're not paying attention. The boss will cast Break Water, placing swirls under party members' feet, which erupt after a delay, dealing large party damage, and leaving behind zones of ice which do massive damage to anyone standing on them. He'll also cast Crashing Ice, a large frontal aimed at the tank. He'll cycle these abilities until he reaches 100 energy and casts Break Water, spawning a wave of water on one side of the room. This does lethal damage, but you can dodge it by standing behind the statue in the center of the room. After the first wave spawns, a second one will spawn on another wall and shoot out at a delay. You'll have to shuffle around the statue to make sure you place the statue between you and the second wave after the first one goes by your party. That's all of the fight mechanics, but the boss will sometimes cast the frontal or the party swirls mid-wave dodging, which can be very tricky to navigate. As a general rule of thumb, try to avoid aiming any mechanics at or near the statue, so it's always a safe spot during the fight. Rinse and repeat until the boss dies. After Hadal dies, there is a small gauntlet of dodging swirls, and then you'll immediately face the final boss, Viq'goth. This boss is another with simple mechanics, but overlaps can make things especially painful. There are 3 platforms around the room, and on each platform there is a Demolishing Terror and a Gripping Terror. To kill the boss, you need to free the cannon engineer and fire a cannon at the boss 3 times. You'll want to focus the Demolishing Terror first to remove a mechanic temporarily. The boss will constantly cast Putrid Waters on 2 players, a heavy dot. The healer should dispel one quickly while focusing their heals on the other one, though if you have a warlock in the group, an imp will let you dispel both every time. Dispelling the dot does knock back any nearby players, so don't stack up. The boss will also bombard the area with swirls to dodge when they cast Call of the Deep. As the boss is doing these mechanics, the Demolishing Terror will cast Slam, dealing heavy party damage and knocking players back. If you have the dot and the terror is casting Slam, be ready to use a defensive or a health pot to survive. Once the Demolishing Terror is dead, the Slam won't happen until the next platform, so just kill the Gripping Terror to free the engineer, and he'll repair the cannon. One player should stay behind to fire the cannon at the boss, while the rest move to the next platform and start on the Demolishing Terror again. After firing the cannon, be quick moving on as the boss will send a lethal blast at the recently fired cannon. Rinse and repeat 3 times to kill the boss. Thank you again for watching one of my dungeon guides, and I hope you find it helpful. Please like and share with your friends so that they can learn the mechanics as well in preparation for Season 1. Also, if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more dungeon content.